Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us for QI Power Hour. This is Tracy Sharon, CEO at the Saskatchewan Health Quality Council. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, QI Power Hour is a free monthly webinar learning series hosted by us here at the Health Quality Council. And we bring together improvers from a variety of sectors with an interest in improving health and healthcare through quality improvement related topics. We are broadcasting in or holding an audio broadcast today, so everyone will be muted, but you can please feel free to share questions in the Q&A and comments in the chat throughout the presentation. I'm joining you from my home office here in Saskatoon on Treaty 6 territory and the traditional land of the Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota, and the homeland of the Métis. And also Health Quality Council, we serve the entire province of Saskatchewan, which also includes traditional lands that are parts of Treaties 2, 4, 5, 8, and 10 as well. And we want to acknowledge our responsibilities as inhabitants of these treaty lands and our commitment to working with Indigenous peoples in the spirit of respect, inclusion, reciprocity, and humility to create a better future for all. As you may know, we do record all of our QI Power Hour sessions. You can feel free to visit our website to review past QI Power Hour webinars, or listen to this one if you'd like a chance to listen in again. While you're on our website, please also sign up for our QI Power Hour email newsletter to receive notices about upcoming sessions and details on how you can register straight to your inbox. And there's a link on the slide, or you can visit our website at saskhealthquality.ca to sign up for that newsletter. Over the last year, and in fact over the past several years, we've been very excited to see the continued growth of this webinar throughout our home province of Saskatchewan. You can see a selection of folks who've joined us from across Saskatchewan, as well as across Canada, and worldwide. And I'm hoping we have some new faces on the webinar today to listen in and to learn with us. And we want to thank you for spending an hour of your time with us and for your commitment to ongoing learning and to continuous improvement in the systems that you're all a part of. As I said earlier, we very much encourage you to participate during the presentation using the chat function. So you'll find that little speech bubble in the corner of your screen in the bottom corner. Please look for that, and please do send your comments, your thoughts, your questions throughout the presentation. We will have time for some discussion and questions at the end, which I will moderate. And so I'll be watching that chat and being sure to raise those questions at the end. So please feel free to share. And without further ado, I want to give my warmest welcomes to Diane Roussin. Diane is the project director of the Winnipeg Boldness Project, where she organizes and completes the day-to-day research and development activities. And the Winnipeg Boldness Project is really exciting. It uses social innovation tools and processes to develop community-driven solutions to help create better opportunities for children and families in the Point Douglas community of Winnipeg to help them succeed. And so without further ado, I just want to pass on my warmest welcomes, Diane, and we'll turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
Miigwech, Tracy, and it's very good to be here with you folks today. I just happened to be in your wonderful province there last week. I was there. I sit on a committee with the Saskatchewan Indian Institute for Technologies, and so just got to take in for a day or two. So it was quite nice. But it's nice to be in this circle, and maybe in addition to what Tracy said, the other thing I'd like you to know about me is that I am Anishinaabe, and I do come from a place called Skowhegan First Nations. That's where my mother was actually physically born there. And so that is our First Nation homeland, and it is in Treaty 2 territory in Manitoba. But right now I'm coming to you from Treaty 1 territory, which is otherwise known as Winnipeg. And that's where I work and live right now. And that's where the Winnipeg Boldness is situated. So just to give you that background. So everything I talk about, I feel like pretty much flows from the fact that I am First Nation and from my Anishinaabe roots, and a lot of what I'm going to talk about is what I've been, I think, the knowledge of the Anishinaabe people. And I know for sure Anishinaabe people have this knowledge, but I do know that other Indigenous um, cultures have this knowledge as well. And probably, I hope many of you know that we're very diverse in Canada. There's lots of Indigenous knowledge systems. There's lots of languages, lots of nations, and lots of practices and protocols. So we're very rich in that diversity. And I think that it's something that by and large Canada has not really if you will, tapped into. And it's not something that we're really using in a predominant way in our healthcare systems or in our or any system for that matter. And so that's a lot of what Winnipeg Boldness is about and is trying to position, is to say that Indigenous knowledge, Indigenous wisdoms, can be used in so many of our systems, and we feel that it would be much better for many of us. And as I'll speak about later, it's not only good for humans, it's good for all my relations. And so it's not even human centric. All my relations being Mother Earth and, Grandmother Moon, and the waters are our relative, the animals are our relatives, the trees are our relatives. And so when we think about, being in balance and living a good life, I talk about, Bamadzuman all the time. So living a good life means being in a good, harmonious relationship with all my relations. So again, that's what I've been taught as an Anishinaabe person. So to talk about the Winnipeg Boldness Project as a starting point, the project is really about trying to make it better for babies. And if that's hard to understand, then we say, well, we're trying to improve the health and wellness outcomes for children 0 to 6. And that's basically saying the same thing. This project started with the idea that, there were some particular data sets and some particular outcomes that weren't great for children 0 to 6 in our city and in this particular neighborhood that I'm working in that we call the Point Douglas neighborhood. And so we set out to try to understand why is that, and then try to come up with some solutions to how we might try to change that. And that's what the Winnipeg Boldness Project was all about in the beginning, and that's still primarily what we're trying to do. And so really it's about how did we go about trying to figure out what is happening with children and trying to figure out what might we do then to help children. That's really where our methodology was really about centering Indigenous wisdom in that. And so, it feels pretty obvious for me to say this, but I will say it because I think there are some parts of our society that don't exactly know this. But there are many, many services, many resources, many programs, and many things that I call systems that are out there that are set up to supposedly help families, help our kids. And as an Indigenous person, a lot of those systems are supposed to be there to help me specifically. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. And at their very worst, they're actually harmful. And these systems I'm talking about can be healthcare systems, they can be child welfare systems, they can be justice systems, education systems, so on and so forth. And the examples I give, I have some numbers which are from 2018, and I'm trying to get some updated ones, but I don't think they've changed a lot. In Manitoba, we had over 11,000 children in the care of the child welfare system, so in the care of the state. And that system we call a child protection system. Over 95% of those children were Indigenous. And that system costed our provincial government about $500 million in 2018. So if you go to the justice system, the numbers there are, conservatively speaking, about 70% of those incarcerated are Indigenous. And that system costs even more than child welfare system. If and folks in this circle probably are very versed in the healthcare realm, and so you will know that who is who is cited as having the unhealthiest of anything, you know, and so having the lowest health, um, those numbers are going to hold. If you look at who's starting businesses, who's graduating from school, you know, the numbers just hold all across the board for Indigenous people. And so that speaks to me about systems, and that there are systems in place that are creating those kinds of numbers and those kinds of outcomes. It is not at all, or I shouldn't say it's not at all, but by and large, it is not because of the Indigenous people's individual capacity. It isn't because we don't know how to care for our kids. It isn't because we don't know how to take care of our health. It isn't because we don't know how to start businesses, or we don't know how to generate or to hold a job, or you know, to not be criminals and so on and so forth. Those systems are creating those conditions. And I feel that those systems are creating those conditions primarily because those systems are designed and built without our perspective at all. There's no Indigenous inclusion into the design of those systems. There's our perspective isn't included, our experiences are not included, our worldviews are not included, our value systems, our knowledge systems, so on and so forth. And so, you know, it sounds really curious, doesn't it, that we have these pretty big, pretty well resourced, you know, systems in place, like a child welfare system, that doesn't, you know, take into account anything about the folks they're purporting to serve. But that's what we do in the social service world quite a bit. And that's why at its worst, those systems can harm. And again, I speak about child welfare the most because it's the one I know the most. We do have research that shows that the longer children are in the care of the child welfare system, in the care of the state, the worse their health and wellness outcomes are for the rest of their lives. And across the board, like they're more risk of becoming homeless, more risk of having mental health issues, more risk of like not being employed, not getting educated, so on and so forth. So that's where I say that at its worst, you know, systems can harm, right? When they're supposed to be there to help. So the whole thing about a social lab, which is with the Winnipeg Boldness, that's our methodology, is to use a social lab approach. All the social innovation world and social labs recognize that at the very start, we need to be working at systems change. And so that's what the Boldness Project is trying to achieve, is systems change. We know that our families can be served so much better. Our families can have so much better health and wellness outcomes. Our families can thrive instead of just surviving. You know, if we could just design our services, our supports, our resources in a much better way that serves them in a much better way. And again, so that's what Boldness is trying to do. We're designing prototypes, and then we're trying to scale those prototypes to show that if we just work in a certain way, we can achieve way better health and wellness, transformational health and wellness outcomes for our families. So that's sort of the theory of change. How we actually did that at the Winnipeg Boldness Project, I have to say, like, you know, we're going into our 8th year now. But really all of the knowledge and all of the methodology and everything that the Boldness Project is doing really is built upon a foundation of knowledge that has existed in our neighborhood for a long, long time. And I feel super privileged to be able to say that I, you know, was on the receiving end of that knowledge by an amazing group of, for me, it was matriarchs. For me, it was a lot of Indigenous women, a lot of women, period, and then a lot of Indigenous women that taught me what I know. I did go to school. I have 2 university degrees, and so there was some value in that. But a lot of what I learned, I had to just throw out the window because when I started working in the community and working with our families, you know, I just realized that there's so much that we're being taught that just isn't what our families are asking for. That's not how our families want to be worked with. And I grew up with my family, again, super fortunate to have grown up with my family and grown up, you know, with my culture. And so I knew all of that, and I had been raised up that way. And then I went to school and I started to learn some different ways. And I thought, because I have a social work training by background. And so I thought there was, you know, these other ways to go about it. And then when I hit the community and hit, you know, and really, again, got just taken in and under the wing of all these Indigenous matriarchs, I realized, oh, well, the way I was brought up is kind of the way that I should be working, right? And so I'm not saying I still use some of that academic knowledge. I do, but a lot of it was just right back into the Indigenous ways of how we treat each other and how we look at family life and how we look at the village. We've all heard of the village, right? It takes a village to raise a child. Well, what is the village? And really, that is the key here is what do we need to do to build that village in a really good way so that we can all raise the children. So that's a lot of what Boldness is trying to do, is trying to highlight that Indigenous wisdom. And I can share a little bit of that with you today. Maybe I'll move to the next slide. I do want you to see some of the folks I'm talking about. I think we have, the next slide has a picture. Well, so that's our introductory slide, but there's some images there of some of the folks that have been working with us and working in a very, like, from the beginning. We knew we wanted to center community voice. And when we talk about improving the lives of children, we wanted to talk to the parents and center the voice of the parents of the kids we're actually talking about. So we really went straight into community, talking to parents, talking to a lot of the service providers that work with the children and the families, talking to like our elders, talking to our knowledge keepers, just really did a deep dive into community into our community to see, what people thought. And I'll go to the next slide. And our community is so wise and brilliant. And if you ask them, they will tell you. And they told us loads and loads and loads as soon as we asked the question. And at the end of about a year's process, we did all the listening and we learned a lot along the way. And at the end of the day, we got to write it down. And what we ended up writing down is what we now call our theory of change. And so this is just a Wordle here. It's a graphic. We have an actual document on our website that's, I think it's like 40 pages long or something like that. And so just asking our community, like, what do we need to do to make it better for babies? And our community said, well, here's how you need to work with us. Work with us like this. And so we wrote that all down. And, the if you were to pick any word in that Wordle, when our families say they want us to recognize interconnectedness. They want us to understand self-determination and sovereignty. They want us to, work with them in a strength-based way. Like, I'm just picking out words, identity, to know that identity is paramount. And so we're talking about children, a lot of, I think, mainstream measurements as well as offerings for kids. We didn't find a lot about identity. And for Indigenous people, like, knowing who you are, our Indigenous success teaching is having a sense of these 4 questions, which is, where do I come from? Where am I going? What is my purpose? Who am I and who am I? Those are the 4 questions. So, like, that's all identity stuff, and that's where we start. And so when we started actually asking our community about the actual practices that we need to do with families and kids, like, there was a lot of cultural stuff like naming ceremonies or placenta ceremonies or coming out, walking out ceremonies. And again, all of that is all about identity and about children knowing who they are. And that when we have that foundation right, so much can flow from there. And that's when kids can turn into successful and thriving, teenagers, and then therefore adults, and so on and so forth. So again, I know it's not only Indigenous people that know this stuff, but that's what I call Indigenous wisdom. I think this wisdom exists in many parts of the world. So our theory of change, so again, our community named it, and our community named it ways of knowing, ways of being, ways of doing, and ways of feeling. And there's no mystery in those words. They are what they say they are. But if that is, some people don't quite understand what that means. So then we say, well, it's a holistic early childhood development model. And so we're often using all kinds of languages, right? And all kinds of words to be able to try to convey the community wisdom and what our community is saying. So there's a lot to be said about our child-centered model. I will say that all of our prototyping is based upon this child-centered model. And so all of our prototyping, therefore, becomes a way for us to express this model, this way of working. These are all examples of how you can work this way. And I feel like every system out there can work in this way if they want to, if they choose to, and if they try to. And if, I mean, for some who know this well, great. And for others who don't know well, then it's going to take a bit of learning. But I do feel like every service and resource we offer out there can work in this way if you want to. So, so maybe I'll go to the next slide. When I talk about centering Indigenous wisdom, what do I mean? There's so many things that that can be centering Indigenous wisdom. A place I'll start, I think, is about being relational. So this image here, I'm in this world of social innovation, so there's a big bend on innovation, and everyone wants to talk about thinking outside the box. And that was always a little bit curious to me because I thought, well, thinking outside the box still centers the box to me. Like I'm still thinking about outside the box. So, you know, somewhere along the way, one of the elders said to me, well, we need to be thinking inside the circle. And that made a whole lot of sense to me the second I heard it. And I've been pursuing that ever since I've heard it and really thinking on and thinking about what does it mean to think inside the circle. And I'm still learning what that means. But I can share with you what I think it means for me up to this point. And there's so much more to go. I think that the Western approach really has been built upon, you know, like an industrial complex, right? And so the idea of industrialization, and I always say, like, I understand that the pyramid was, you know, as a business structure, having a decision at the top, and then everybody needs to follow the exact decisions so that at the bottom of that pyramid, we're punching out the exact same wheel or the exact same product so we can do assembly line stuff, right? I don't think we want people getting creative designing all kinds of different wheels at the bottom, right? So I understand how that came into being. But then we applied it to our social services, and people are not the same as cars, or they're not the same as widgets, right? And so for us, our families are highly unique, and they have very unique situations. And so a standardized approach isn't great for our families. So our families are quite often asking for a customized approach, which means, to me, means being in relationship. And so when you're in a relationship with someone, you can be highly customized to what is going on with them, to what they're needing right now, or what is the nuance of the situation, what's the context. You know, I've worked for instance, with a lot of pregnant teens and young moms. And so it was a group home setting at one time that I was working in. And so um, we didn't have a rule book because we were values based. And so we said, we're going to make decisions from a values based place versus a rules based place. And a values based place means you have a lot of conversations about what's important. And so when we all know what's important, then we make decisions based on what we think is important. There's no rule book that is ever going to tell us the right thing to do in every single situation. And of course, working with young moms who are coming from all kinds of walks of life and all kinds of situations, there's no rule book that can tell you how to deal with those moms every single day. And so instead, we spend a lot of time being in close relationship with those young moms, and we know what's going on with them, and we can respond to them in a very customized way. And so when the girls were all living together, we would treat them differently. Something would happen, and we'd say, okay, well, here's the situation, and here's what's going on, and here's how we're all going to deal with it. And so then, you know, one girl would say, well, why is she getting that? And I'm not getting that. And it's like, well, because she's different than you and she says a different thing. Like, you know, and you're not going through what she's going through, right? So and so it took a little, it didn't take very long for our young moms to figure out, yeah, that's right. Like so then you get away from that scarcity thinking, right? Like you're gonna get what you need, right? Because we're gonna deal with you as you are happening and what you need. And it's not just everybody gets half a cup of water because that's what the rule book says, whether you need that half a cup of water or not. Right? And so often when we see our families in like at powwows or in big crowds, you'll see like when we're doing food and stuff, like I despise the lineup. I hate the lineup. I won't make any family lineup for anything. Instead, I'm like, we're going to serve you, or like, there's just a different way that we can do this. And I know people get a little bit freaked out. Oh, is there going to be enough food? I'm telling you, when I've been in situations with families, they make sure there's enough. And then they look around and they go, oh, well, that one over there needs some, so we got to give some over there. So they just redistribute, in a way that makes sense for it, that everybody gets some, right? And I've seen that time and time again. And so the rules would say everybody gets their one plate of food, right? But if there isn't a plate of food for everyone, then what do you do? And I'm telling you, they just figure it out. And some people like, you know what, I don't need my food today. Like, here, you can have this one or something like that, right? So being values-based decision making versus rules-based decision making, being which then necessitates, I think, being in a good relationship versus being transactional, right? And then we can be customized that way versus standardized. Um, and then when we work from that place, I think we really need to intentionally create conditions of flexibility, um, conditions of being able to be responsive, right? We talk about at Boldness trying to create space for our families, like when we're trying to brainstorm or build, design these prototypes, we really to come from open space and blank space versus straw dog. Sometimes we'll do straw dog, but mostly we try to do open space. And sometimes people just freeze at the thought of a blank page. But and then you just go wherever it's going to go, and that gives space for emergence, right? That gives space for iteration. And I think that when you have strong, trusting relationships with each other, people are way more willing to go take risks and to experiment and to be emergent and to not know. And this whole thing about social innovation, it is anti-planning. And so you're not supposed to know. And, as an Indigenous person, so often we're inundated with experts who are supposed to know more than us about all kinds of things, and then but they don't. They have something to add, but they don't know more than us. And sometimes they know not much at all than us. And yet, sometimes they get imposed upon us. I eat lots of these parenting programs that our parents hate. And yet some of our parents are like the best parents ever. They're raising 10 kids. Like, I think they know what they're doing, versus and I have to say, when I ran the group home, like I was the manager, so I wasn't myself running parenting programs. At that time, I did not have children. And I'm like, yeah, how am I going to deliver a parenting program? I don't have kids. Like, this is ridiculous. And I'm running, trying to deliver this program to folks who are on their third child. Like, this is just insane. So so peer-to-peer is big, right? And so there is a time and a place for expertise. And when our families need expertise, they will ask for it. And that is when we give it, not any other time. We don't oppose that stuff, right? And there is a lot of knowledge in peer-to-peer relationships. And so our parents are experts, and they are experts with each other. And man, when you get into conversations with our parents, they'll tell you how to navigate systems. They'll tell you where the loopholes are, or they'll tell you which worker, our and there's been times where I was a policy analyst one time. And so I was talking to the actual, and again, with this one, it had to do with social assistance legislation, and we were trying to draft policy. And so I just got a group of people who were on social assistance together, and they were telling me stuff about the social assistance system that the actual workers didn't even know or realize. They didn't know that that's how it actually worked, or if they didn't know that that's the way the discretionary things could happen. Like, so again, it's just, we talk about clan system teachings in Indigenous world, or at least for Anishinaabe and other Indigenous cultures talk about clan system teachings. And clan system teachings say that every voice in the circle is needed. And so what we try really hard to do is to understand the role and responsibility of each of those voices, because each of those voices does have a role and does have a responsibility. And so that's where we get away from sort of this concept of the monolith of the expert. We are all experts. And so then we all bring a level of expertise in a certain area. And so it's all needed, right? But my expertise doesn't put me above you. And so polyolithic thinking, I think our families say like there's many ways to do a thing, and that's customization. But I feel like so much of Western society or Western paradigms are about the way and monolithic thinking, and there's a right and a wrong, and so this is the way to do it. And I just, so in a circle, right? There's no beginning, there's no end. Like you start in the middle, you start on the outside, start wherever you want, right? Whereas that pyramid is kind of it's linear, right? And it's chronological a lot of the time. Whereas I feel like circle thinking is more about mutuality and reciprocity and the back and forth thing, and like it's more networked, right? Like, because I think that's if you John Burroughs, who I love out in BC, like he talks about if you're able to read the land and read nature, then you're literate. And so we just look to nature, right? And we look to what we see, and often we see like it's more networked and more circular and more, the interconnections of things. I also feel like a lot of Western paradigms are about independence. Like independence is the pinnacle of society. Like I think about capitalism and how we need like such big houses and 3 cars and 6 TVs and 3 fridges, right, for like 2 people. And so we're just trying, and then we need these big fences in between each other. And so we're trying so hard to be independent because, that's success. Well, in Indigenous culture, our elders say that is not, that's teenage time. Like, the ages and stages. Like, so when you're small and born and small, that's the stages of dependency. And so there's a lot to be learned in the stages of dependency. And then you move into stages of independence. And so there's a lot to be learned there, and that's sort of in your teenagehood and in your early years. But as you get to be a more mature adult and into your senior years, you're moving into interconnectedness and interdependence. And so really trying to understand how we are interconnected and what that interdependence looks like. And we should be striving for that, and that we are a way better society if we're interconnected, right? And so we think about that with children, like how are our children interconnected and interdependent in society? I did a TED talk on this, and I said, um, hopefully we all have a motherly figure in your life, like whether it's your mom or your granny or your auntie or a bigger sister or somebody, like hope a good friend. Hopefully there's somebody in your life that plays that motherly figure for you. And if you think about that person, I have a mom and she just walked in actually. I don't know if it's too noisy in here, but so when I think about my mom, like I think about what makes her happy. I think about her health. I think about, I have 2 daughters, and I think about how she's connected to my 2 daughters. I think about how they make me happy. So I just think about like being in good relationship with my mom. How can I be in this best relationship as possible with my mom? And when she's out of whack, I'm out of whack. And when she's not feeling good or feeling right, like it concerns me. And then I want to figure out what can I do to make that better. And so this is how I hope we think about our mothers, right? Well, then we think about Mother Earth, right? And so, or let me go back to the way how we treat Mother Earth, and then go back to, is this how you would treat your mother? Like, would we think, I need to extract every single ounce of value I can out of my mother? Like, I really don't care what happens to her. I just need it to be a one-way street where I can take as much as I can from her. And I'm sure she'll be fine. Like, I don't know. Oh, and then even when she's not, I'm like, oh, well, I don't know what to do about that, right? Like she's hurting, but I don't know. It's not my problem, or it's too complicated for me to think about. Like if my mom is hurting and it's complicated, I'm going to try and figure it out, right? And I'm going to get as many people involved as I can to help me figure it out. So, the difference in worldview, right, in terms of what we center for our values and what we center as our perspective. And so when we think about all my relations, like it's not, like I said earlier, not human centric. And about Mino Bamadzuin is living the good life. Like Mino Bamadzuin is living like a good and healthy life. And how do we achieve Mino Bamadzuin? Well, again, it's about being in balance and being in harmonious relationship with all my relations. And so if we think about being in that kind of balanced relationship with the water or with animals or with the trees, like how does it change our behavior, or even how does it even change our language, right? Like it's not, I'm trying to manage Mother Earth. I'm trying to, control Mother Earth. I'm trying to, we talk like that about water here in Manitoba. We have lots of hydroelectricity, so we're always trying to manage the water and control the water and make the water do what we want it to do to like, provide significant benefit to us. Um, and now in Manitoba, we're having a hard time because our water's not healthy and we're trying to figure out, uh-oh, because we have not taken care of our water for a long time, right? And so again, climate change, we see this all across the planet. So there's lots of different, there's 7 natural ways of healing, for instance. When I go into to groups or any meeting nowadays, I start with a sharing circle and it's about how are you? There's a lot of tears, there's a lot of laughing, there's a lot of, just when we get to a good trusting relationship place with each other, people just, share. And so there's 7 ways. I mean, you can Google some of this. But one of the ways of natural healing is to share. So sharing, by talking to one another, there's this thing called talk therapy, right? Um, the second one, and another one is laughing, like laughter. And so there's a science to that. Like we know that the happy chemicals that, spring up in us when we're laughing. Um, Sweating is another one. I mean, hopefully we've all been to yoga and the spa and things like that, right? We have in Indigenous culture, we have ceremonies for all of this, right? We have ceremonies that are centered around each of these natural ways of healing. So that's a knowledge system that we have, and so I'm always encouraging all kinds of laughing and crying in my meetings, but I know that in sort of mainstream world, I go into some circles, that is seen as very unprofessional. If we're crying and sharing personally and maybe even coming unhinged and off the rails at times in our meetings, and we're the professionals, that is seen as very unprofessional. And I know that I've done that in some unionized environments, and I did it with a school one time, like I was working out of a school. And the principal got grieved by a couple of staff, like so many times, because the staff felt it was very unprofessional. They thought, well, I didn't sign up for therapy, like to do a sharing circle. They're like, I didn't sign up for therapy. And they felt super uncomfortable sitting in that circle, listening to everybody share personally. It just wasn't what they wanted to do. And yet to me, I'm like, any circle that doesn't do that, I feel that's weird that people aren't personally sharing and connecting to one another. If we're just our titles and our professional hats, like I feel like I don't even know who you are. That could have just been an email then, I guess. Um, so again, that centering of relationality. There's a whole bunch more in that think inside the circle, but I know I'm getting really close to time here. But I just want to say that there are lots of Indigenous knowledge systems that I think are about thinking inside the circle, and we can learn them and we can use them in our healthcare systems. We can use them in our child welfare systems. Like we can use them in all of our systems, and so that's the work of Bold. That's the scaling side, right? Is to trying to say, okay, how do we scale this stuff? Like the community has shown us the prototype, but how do we scale this now? And I realized I didn't talk a lot about the prototypes, but our families will say, for instance, let's see here, baby basket, right? It was about infant mortality. What might we do about that? And there was the concept of baby box, and so that has come. It was developed in 1930s, and I want to say Denmark. I always get it wrong, but it came from far, and it was about a safe sleep surface, and it's an actual box. Well, our community said the idea of creating a safe sleep surface and a box really is about keeping babies alive. And we want to talk about thrive. That's a low bar. And why would we just keep the babies alive? We want to talk about how our babies can thrive. And so when you start the conversation from thrive versus alive, it takes you down a whole different road. And so they came up with this concept of baby basket instead, which meant that there's a physical basket and somebody will bring you that basket, inviting a relationship with you and your newborn. And in the basket is they designed a whole thing where they created a laundry list and they put a point value on everything. And so each parent can customize what they want in that basket and based on a point system. And so they created like a long list of stuff. And then I think there might have, I'm trying to think if they left a blank, even if you want to add things in there too. And so, because it could be your first kid, it could be your 10th kid, what are the things you need when you're, at various stages of having children. And so the basket itself is very customized. And then in addition to the things that are in the basket, loads of resources, like if you want to, lots of cultural stuff, right? So if you want to get like a skirt for your child, if you want to get moccasins for your child, if you want to do a naming ceremony, if you want to learn about placenta ceremonies, if all of that stuff is also there. So folks could, tap into that if they wanted that. So again, trying to show there's a village here and it's sort of represented in this basket. And so how might we help you access whatever it is you need within this village, right? And so that's the difference than a baby box. And that's where our community took it in terms of that particular prototype. And they did that every single time with every single prototype. So I will stop talking and we'll go maybe to questions, I think, perhaps.
Sure, sounds great. Thanks so much, Diane. And the contact information for the Winnipeg Boldness Project is up on the slide right now, and I'm sure you'd welcome folks reaching out if they have additional questions. But we have some time now, which is great. And thank you so much for sharing an example of a prototype. I was kind of curious as well. What kinds of ideas have you tried and what did you learn from those? So that's a great example, and maybe some more will come up as we go through the Q&A part. But this is a really interesting one from Allison in the chat. Thank you, Allison, because I was hoping to learn the same thing. So what challenges have you experienced when you try to scale up some of the successful prototypes? And can you share some strategies you found to overcome those challenges? I know that's one, we think about our work in quality improvement. I'm sure many others on the webinar have experienced. How do you scale up in a way that's also kind of customizable for the communities or individuals or groups you might be scaling up to? Can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, so there's different definitions of what scaling is. And so like if it's feeling a bit programmatic, like if some of the prototypes feel like they could be designed as a program and then we can just replicate that program. Sometimes just more and more of that. I mean, that's probably the easiest concept of scaling. But if you can get it embedded in policy, that's another concept of scaling for us. And so I think I want to say there's the 5 concepts of scaling. There's a scaling up, scaling out, scaling deep. And so one example of scaling was when we were working with child welfare for the Canada Learning Bond. I'll talk about Canada Learning Bond is a federal program. It's educational savings. And so it's free money technically, from the federal government. And it had a low sign up rate across Canada. And so the feds were going, why is this happening? And there's other people that are attached to this Canada Learning Bond program who also wanted to know, why is there such a low sign up? So then we took it on and went, okay, well, we'll go ask our families why it's such a low sign up. And so we designed a prototype to run like 20 families through a sign up process. And we learned so much from our families running them through that process. And at the end of the day, the very first thing they told us, or the most important thing I think they told us lots, was that birth certificates was number one, the biggest issue. And if you walk that back, like, because there's a big long process to get to birth certificates because it's a domino, right? There's 6 dominoes from the actual sign up process to the birth certificate. And so, but at the end of the day, it was the birth certificate, provincial jurisdiction. The federal government was like, well, what do we do with that? That's a provincial thing. And that's not our jurisdiction. So then right there, two levels of government who said, that's not my jurisdiction. And so we got to go deal with that, right? And say, well, can we not all collaborate here? And then it took us a long time to generate our data in the community about why the birth certificate was a problem for families. And families identified a whole bunch of reasons why it was hard for them to get a birth certificate. So at first, we didn't have a lot of traction with our provincial government to understand that that was actually an issue. So we had to generate a bunch of data. Then there was a lot of other organizations around us who were also having issues with the birth certificate, and it wasn't for the Canada Learning Bond, it was for other things they were trying, like other issues. So there was a whole group of organizations that were very interested in tackling this birth certificate issue. So we were able to coalition with a lot of other groups to learn about a lot more about what were the barriers. So just presenting a lot of that. At the end of the day, it took like about 4 or 5 years of just kind of constantly pushing that button and saying and bringing, we designed like a 1-page map that just sort of had the big red arrow pointing at the birth certificate and showing why that was the thing. Because people want to change the conversation they want to change the channel real fast. So we would get into conversations about Canada Learning Bond, and people would all of a sudden track off to, oh, we need better brochures. And it's like, no, that's not like our families, that's not the issue. You can go ahead and make better brochures, but that isn't what our families are saying is the issue, right? And then it was like, oh, well, awareness. We just need to do hot dog day and things like that, right? Like, dude, we tried that. Like we did we tested all of that hot dog day. And at the end of the day, sure, we had 300 families show up in the gym, but not one sign up because no one had a birth certificate. Right? Sorry, I'm getting a dry throat. so we did try a lot with our families, and they told us like how to go about this. Sorry, I'm gonna get scratchy throat. I need to take just a moment here.
No problem. Yeah, I think it's kind of demonstrates. So we talk in our kind of quality improvement work about, small tests of change, testing and learning. I think that's kind of, what you've been describing is we tried this thing, we learned from it. We tried this other thing, we learned from it, and that led us closer and closer to the problem. And then it just became having to convince folks, yeah, we tried all this stuff and this really is the issue. But that seems to be kind of the cycle of learning.
So I will say, sorry, I just had a real dry patch in my throat there, but
No
I will
worries.
say that that the provincial government did eventually make some changes within their department, and they were able to deal with all the things that were presented to them. And so they actually systematically did a whole bunch of stuff that took away most of those barriers that families were facing to obtain a birth certificate. So again, it took the provincial government to make changes within their department, and they were pretty big changes, and which I'm not taking any credit for. I mean, they had to make those changes themselves, and so we were like super grateful that they did it. And I think it's not only benefited folks who are trying to sign up for Canada Learning Bond, but it benefited a whole bunch of other individuals and families. For instance, one of our program partners was helping men who are coming out of the jail system, helping them get jobs and to get settled, out of the jail systems. And one of their biggest barriers was not necessarily their criminal record. It was access to ID and access to a birth certificate was one of their biggest barriers to getting resettled into society. So things like that. So that's an example. That's one of the shining examples of scale. They're not all like that, because I think achieving scale is really hard. And it's really difficult, and it's a long haul, but we hung in there, and so in that case it happened.
The persistence pays off. Yeah. So a couple of questions in here. Folks are curious about the project's funding model and who your partners are.
Excuse me. So we're very fortunate to get private family foundation money. So McConnell Family Foundation is our funder, and they are matched by the provincial government. And so both of those funders have been walking with us for these 8 years. So we're super grateful that they have invested in us. But I will say that I think the philanthropic dollar was key, because I feel like it was the lead dollar, and I feel like it was the dollar that de-risked, because we were like wanting to run this innovation lab, and everybody's like, what is that? And well, we're going to design prototypes. So what are those? And we want to do it from a community driven perspective, right? And so well, what are you going to do? And it's like, well, we don't know until the community tells us, so like I feel like there's a lot of trust-based philanthropy going on there. But yeah, I think the philanthropy was really key for us, and continues to be key for us. And I think the philanthropy money really did understand innovation lab, so understood the model of iteration and emergence, and experimentation and trying, and which is very different than sort of project or program based funding, right? Like tell us what you're going to do for 12 months and then do it once we give you the money. Like, don't veer from that. That is not what we're doing. And then we get other, mostly foundational money, like other kinds of corporate foundations and community foundations have contributed to our funding as well.
Great, thank you. Yeah, through a lot of what you were talking about during the presentation, you just mentioned the idea of trying innovative new ideas, new ways of working. It took me back to you describing the theory of change. I know that's a word we use a lot at Health Quality Council as well. And when you start going down that road, you start to realize, as you said, there are many different ways this problem can be solved. That's often one of the big ahas of thinking about that and learning about improvement is you go in having one solution, you come out with thousands. And so just wondering with that, and then kind of the new way of, or a different way of approaching change, are you seeing any evidence, you talked about the birth certificate example, of like a change in thinking or a change in policy related to some of the prototypes that you've tried that have helped others kind of rethink their approach to change?
Yeah, I think what we're trying to do is write down a way of working that many of our community organizations have been doing for a long, long time. And I think even the way that they're doing the work, sometimes I say this, and I always have to be careful because I don't want to get anyone in trouble. Sometimes I was the executive director of a couple of organizations before I did Boldness, and so I can speak to what I used to do. Sometimes you're doing the stuff under the cover of darkness, right? Because the funding parameters don't exactly fit the needs of the community. So you're trying to be really creative to make the money work for community. But that, gosh, if this really got out there in a big, like even honorariums, right? Like if this gets out there in a big way, like you could be in trouble. And so yet you're trying to make it work for community. So I always say boldness, we're able to operate out in the light. We're saying, no, this is what we're doing. This is exactly what the money's going for. And this is the test, right? This is the prototype. And then once successful, if you want to fund more of this, then here's our community organizations doing this work. And so let them do the work, right? And so again, having to be really creative if it doesn't exactly fit within your funding parameter, but yet you're trying to make it work for community. That happens all the time. So that's the off the side of the desk or under the cover of darkness. So I think that's one thing we're trying to demonstrate through all of these prototypes is that there's a different way we could be funding. The transparency can still be there, the accountability can still be there, but who gets to decide about that money is the front end, is the community. And then we'll tell you all about it after the fact. One of the good examples I use a lot is when we started Boldness and we were doing some of our prototypes, we're like, oh, we're building the airplane as we're flying it, right? Everybody's heard that. And then at one point we looked back and went, oh my God, we're building a bus. It's not even an airplane. So to have said to a funder, we're going to build an airplane as we fly it. And then the funder would have said, okay, go ahead and we'll fund that. And then to turn around and go, oh my God, we ended up building a bus in the end. Like to go back to your funder and go, okay, we built a bus instead. And so, wouldn't it be nice if you could up front with your funder say, okay, we're going to go where community tells us to go. We will tell you every step of the way. We will document it, to the nth degree. We will tell you where every penny went. Like we can still be transparent. I think the accountability kind of shifts though to the community, right? Not necessarily to your funder.
And sometimes the path doesn't become clear until you're on it. And you have to start down to find out what that is. And I think that can clash sometimes with more traditional planning approaches where you make your plan and then you implement it. And it can be hard to move from one to the other. All right, I'll put out one final call for questions or thoughts. Oh, just a nice comment here. So good to hear a success story. Diane, you're a great speaker and thanks for all you do. Your passion comes through as you present. I'm sure many on the call have that sentiment as well. I'll just pause if there's any further questions from the chat. Might have another minute or two.
Just to say also that we try to, sorry, this dry throat is killing me here. But just to say that we do try to put a lot of our stuff on our website and we try to do a lot of videos. And so we're trying all the different ways to try to get our story out there. If you want to read the 50-page report, it's there too. But we're trying all the different ways to try to get our story out there.
Excellent. And I think I saw that you have a podcast as well. Great. So folks can listen to the podcast if you'd like to hear more. Excellent. You know, you've got your contact information and your social media tags. I think those are supposed to look like social media symbols, but something might have gotten lost in the translation on the slide. But feel free, folks, to check out those venues. So we're getting to the last couple of minutes now. So I just want to give you my thanks, and I'm sure extending the thanks of everyone on the call, Diane, for sharing with us today. It was fascinating learning about the Winnipeg Boldness Project. I know I'm going to go check out their website and podcasts, and just the amazing work that you're doing, and especially community-led work is just really great to hear. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, and thank you for inviting us. I'm always like super grateful that people are even interested and that people would take a whole hour out of their day to listen. So I just want to thank you as well. So miigwech.
Miigwech. And to show our thanks, I know it's just a small token of appreciation, but for speaking at QI Power Hour, you will be the lovely new owner of a pair of these iHeart Quality Improvement socks. So watch your mailbox, they'll be on their way to you. And that's just a small token of our appreciation for you joining us today. And for those listening, if you would like a pair of socks of your own, we'd love to hear your pitch about speaking on QI Power Hour and sharing your story with us. There's a link in the chat to do that. So I just have a few more kind of wrap up things here, and then we'll bid farewell for the day. At Health Quality Council, we're very much interested in continuous improvement. When you leave the webinar today, you'll see this screen pop up. It would take you to a post-webinar survey. Don't be alarmed. It's not, you know, a phishing attempt or anything like that. It is an actual survey, so you can feel safe in hitting that continue button. Please do fill out our survey. We do use that feedback to improve our webinar all of the time, and we thank you for taking the time to do that. And we do not yet have a speaker lined up for April, so if you've got an idea brewing, please do reach out. And please stay tuned to our website and social media channels to hear about our upcoming April QI Power Hour when we have some speaker information for you. And so with that, I'd like to bid everyone farewell. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Diane. And I hope everybody has a lovely weekend. Stay safe and take care.